Joining us right now is John Keim, covers the Commanders for ESPN.com. He's been on the beat forever, but I don't think he's been on the beat during an 11-win season. Hey, John.
No. Hey, guys, I have not. This is the first one. Amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, I said this, and I'll say it throughout. The story starts and ends with Jayden Daniels.
Yeah. Yes. And there's a lot of positives that have happened here this past year. Like a lot of, with from the energy in the building, the atmosphere, et cetera. And this, this team has a really tight bond, and that's all true. But 5 powers that engine. And when you have a guy, but you know what? The players know that. They all know that. They know that he's special. And so it's every guy you talk to after the game is just like their eyes just get wide talking about him because of what he does and what he means to them. I think what they like the most is the guy who never says that is Jayden Daniels himself. So he just goes out and does his job. But yeah, he's the guy that makes it different here.
And John, look, success is not always a straight line up. We know that.
No.
People can regress. People can take steps back. But like with the talent that's around him now, it should only get better and better year after year with Adam Peters at the helm, picking the players. We know he's going to pick better players than Ron. I mean, we just know that. We know that that's a fact. That's not even a guess. That's a fact. So, like, Jayden to do this with basically Terry McLaurin and, let's be honest, a lot of cast-offs around him, especially on offense. Like, when you start adding better pieces, better players, better receivers, like, it's only going to make things easier for Jayden over the next few years, which for Commanders fans, I mean, that's just a great thought to have. Oh, for sure. And, last night there was a stretch in the fourth quarter where you have like guys like Bryson Tremaine, Jamison Crowder, KJ Osborne on the field at the same time. Like, they're professional receivers, and Jamison has been a very good receiver in this league. But at this point, like at the beginning of the season, you would not think that those would be the 3 out there in a potential playoff clinching scenario, right? Because it's just one wasn't here, one was on the press squad, one was, was a guy who's had a nice career, but like that's not the 3 that are going to scare defenses per se, right? So when and yet it still works because of what Daniels can do, and so there are. There's a different level you can get to with this offense, and the more he sees, the more he's in the game, and then the better you get around him, or just even little things like just a more consistent run game. Look what something like that could do for him. You look at Lamar Jackson was really, really good before, and then you get Derrick Henry with him, and now he's really, really, really good. It's like that's the difference things like that can make, and can you get that here? And that's what they have to build to sustain it because, things don't – this has been a really fun year for them and for fans, and they should enjoy it as much as they can. But you don't know what happens one year to the next. Right. You don't – because schedules change, things change, et cetera. And so the goal then is to make sure you're always building, surrounding him with to maximize that. And I think Dan Quinn's been around long enough, and Adam Peters has been around long enough to understand, I think, where things are at, what they need to add to keep it going forward. So, John, EB is on vacation this week. He's actually calling in the 9 o'clock hour. So one of his mantras over the years is, I love this team's weapons, specifically talking about like offensive weapons, wide receivers. And early in the season, he was over talking to me about Olamide Zaccheaus, about Oz. And I was like, he's a bit player. He's like a 4th or 5th receiver. He's a special teamer. He's nothing special. But with Noah Brown getting sidelined, he's been a big piece of the offense over the last 4 weeks with 19 catches in that span. He caught the touchdown last night. Like, he's been a guy that Jayden's had to rely on. He's come up big. He has, and it's, he's been a productive receiver in this league, right in that range of the 40 catch range. Did not have a good year last year number-wise, and so like you didn't know what he was going to do. One of the things that they've talked about with him and Dan Quinn in particular would say like the standard that he sets for himself and in that room. And so when you have a guy that comes and does what he does because of that kind of attitude, right? And he's also someone who there was a play earlier in the year where he's coming from the other side. It was somebody was running down the field, and he's sprinting from the other side to get back involved in the play just to maybe throw a block or something, but the guy ends up fumbling, and he ends up recovering it. But it's just because from the other side of the field, he's sprinting down to get back in the play. If he doesn't do that, they lose the ball. Like, that's the kind of guy he is. So I think there's they like him because of that. But then you look as a receiver, I think one of the things that Cliff Kingsbury does well as a coordinator is use guys how they need to be used, or create situations where they can get open. And I think, and Zacchaeus has taken advantage of that. I mean, he's what you want in a backup receiver in the NFL, a guy who stays ready, prepares a certain way, and when its number is called, goes out there and does the job.
Talking to John Keim, ESPN.com insider, covers the Commanders. Of course, Commanders clinch a playoff berth. So we started to mention maybe one of the negatives, and it's the rush defense. They get Jonathan Allen back yesterday. I don't know how much he was on the field. I don't know if you noticed it. I guess we'll get snap counts a little bit later. What are you seeing from what appears to be a huge deficiency for this team?
It's been a season-long one, too. And that, just as a little aside, it's kind of amazing. Like, the run game has been very inconsistent. The run defense has been very inconsistent. And yet they're making it work because of Jayden Daniels.
Yep.
But, yes, that has not been good. And I will say, because Bijan Robinson had he had 82 yards rushing in the first half. Now, he only finished with 90. So he was 4 for 8 in the second half. That's 2 weeks in a row where in the second half it's been better. Now, the other part of that is Atlanta barely had the ball in the second half, but when they gave it to him, it was different. So just one little thing like with John Allen, and I have to go back and watch this, but because there were times where I wasn't, you look for him, but you're not looking for him because there's so much going on. And, but in the second half, one of the things they did do is something they haven't been able to do since he was hurt, which is use the lineup where you can put Daron Payne at end. So they had the one lineup where they had an end, and they had at tackles they had Allen and Johnny Newton, and then Payne was at a defensive end. And then that group, I know the first couple of times they did that, Robinson got nothing, and Allen was, there was Jalen Holmes one time had a really good edge set, and Allen made the tackle. So they're. In the second half, it was better, and part of that was because of some of the lineups they could use with him. But it is, I don't have an answer for it, why it's been bad, because it's been like that all year. And I think if I knew right now, they would know even more, and they would have it solved. But part of it just sometimes it's like you watch it, it's sometimes different things, and whether it's like not setting the edge enough, or not getting somebody losing a double team, or getting moved out of the gap, and maybe somebody ducking, going to the ball, taking an angle, but ducking behind a blocker rather than taking them on and trying to make a play that way, and then creating a bigger gap. But it's what Atlanta does very well, though, is run the ball. But it has been a problem all year, and it's something that going forward you absolutely have to fix.
Hey, John, I hate to kick a man when he's down, but I'm going to do it. Fedarian Mathis has to feel like at an all-time low that a team that can't stop the run at all, they just said, you know what, we don't want your services anymore, no longer interested. And look, I know part of that is that he was a Ron guy, and there aren't many of those guys left. They're purging the Ron guys off the roster. And Mathis, a second-rounder, like, that hurts you when you're cutting second rounders, and this has been a trend for the few remaining guys that Ron picked outside of a few.
Yeah, and it's funny because they're not purging them because they're Ron's guys. They're purging them because they're not helping.
Right. They're not good.
Right.
And that's the problem. So, I mean, he was inactive the last couple of weeks, so you saw the writing on the wall for him. And I will say, like in training camp, like because they traded John Ridgeway to the Saints, obviously, and I liked Ridgeway. Ridgeway seems to be doing a nice job. I think he's a guy that would have helped. I think Mathis, though, when you look at him, and he started to play better in training camp right around the time that they traded Ridgeway, and you figure, okay, there's more upside there with him, so keep him around to see. And he did hit a stretch in the middle of the year or so where it's like, oh, okay, maybe he's starting to figure out, and then he just kind of went back. And so, yeah, I think it's kind of amazing that when you look at it, they had 7 guys drafted in the first 2 rounds from, I think, in the 3 or 4 years of his 4 drafts. There's only 2 of them left, and that's a big miss, and it's a big miss for a team or franchise that somehow still has won 11 games despite those drafts yielding not a whole lot. So yeah, I mean, it's, the other thing that's good too is there was no tie to these guys. Like, if they couldn't play, they were going to make a move, and they did. And I think that's the luxury of being in the first year of a new program, that you can, if there are mistakes, you correct them and you move on.
John, they clinched a playoff berth. Don't know who they're going to play yet, but if they win, they would be the 6th seed, where they would probably play the Rams. I think there's a scenario where maybe Tampa could leapfrog the Rams. I'm not quite sure on that. So we don't know who they're going to play in the playoffs. Are they going to play for the win definitively next week and play all their guys? Because there's a possibility, I don't think it's likely, but a possibility you could rest some guys because you're in and you don't care who you could play. You beat the Eagles before. Maybe you're not scared of the Eagles. So you just be like, we're going to shut some guys down and give them some rest.
I don't know the answer to that. I would say, though, based on how they operate, they've been kind of careful all year with guys who are hurt. Mm-hmm. So there are going to be some guys like Tyler Biotis left there in a walking boot last night.
Wow.
If he can't go, like if he's close, like, yeah, you can say like you want to get him ready for the playoffs, right? Dallas is in a position where you not so much rest them, but if there's a question, then you don't have to push them, right? So I think it's more about that than it is just like, hey, just rest these guys. But I think if there's, again, if there's some indecision on somebody like with Marshawn Lattimore, like who knows, or Danny Brown with the hamstrings, like those are tricky. Those like another ones where you can give them just, okay, you don't have to push it this week with them. So keep them out and just, make sure they're ready for the playoffs, because that's the bigger game. But I don't see them doing it unless there is some level of an issue with an injury.
John, I know nothing about NFL head coaching, assistant coaching, being a coordinator, any of it. But I do know this. I know that Dan Quinn and his subordinates are going to talk about the 13 penalties for 108 yards. Like that cannot continue going forward. Like, I'm sure that's going to be a point of emphasis this week.
For sure. And they've been worse with that the last several weeks too. Like they're getting I think it's a couple more per game over the last 5-6 weeks, something like that. But last night was horrendous and each one of them was a killer. Like, it just was unreal for a while, where it's like, Mike Sanders still lines up off sides on a field goal. Like, that's a 4-point bonus for the Falcons, because they had the field goal. Now instead you get the ball, you keep going, and you get a touchdown, which was set up by another penalty, pass interference, and then penalty that takes points off the board. The holding calls were just unreal because they just kept putting him in a hole after hole. And so, again, it's like sometimes you look at some of the stuff that was happening last night. It's funny because like last week, you would have said you can't win a game when you've turned the ball over 5 times. Well, they did. Then your thing is, there's no way you can win. You're not going to win a game when you have 13 penalties. Well, they did. But it is not like you cannot go and, you can't thrive that way. But, that was, and I know after the holding penalty that took away Olamide Zaccheaus' touchdown, it was on Sam Cosmi, and I've never seen the guy that upset. I mean, he was jumping up and down.
Yeah, he was pissed.
And gesturing to the officials. You could tell that he was gesturing like the way he was doing it was legal, and they clearly disagreed. But like it was just amazing all night, just how tough it was. And the one, with they gave Davis had the PI that set up a potential game-winning kick at the end of regulation. So, it was just one after another. And they were, for a long time, they were just killers. And somehow they came back.
John, always pleasure talking to you, man. Get some rest. Great game.
Thanks,
they're in the playoffs. Maybe get some playoff money. I don't know how it works with ESPN.
I'm not getting a share of anything, but listen, man, it'll be January and people are interested in this team for something other than free agency or a draft pick.
It's big.
So I will enjoy that part.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, it's John Keim
Thanks, John.
from ESPN.com.